Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So today I want to talk about a comment that's been hotly debated and protested against over, maybe for the last week or so. When I saw these comments come out, I'm like, okay, whenever I see, controversy like this brewing, and it fits into, the nature of what I talk about on this channel, is something that I'm going to have to talk about. I had already prepared the material, I want to say about 5 days ago, when some of my contacts in Brazil started sending me messages saying, hey, look, did you hear about this? Like, yeah, I definitely heard about it because a lot of us roll in the same social circle. So there's no way I couldn't have heard about this. It's just that, man, there's so much good news, bad news, controversial news coming out of Brazil in terms of the Black population that sometimes I can't get to something immediately, but I knew I was going to get to this video eventually. So I have to talk about it today because it again, once again, it shows how Brazilians look at the slavery era. Now, for those of you who don't know, Brazil was one of the largest or the largest slaveholding countries, between the 16th and 19th century. Everybody knows about the American slave era, but for those who know about that era, just understand in Brazil, a lot of historians will say that slavery was more brutal in Brazil. There were far more enslaved Africans sent to Brazil. So Brazil should be on everybody's radar because in many ways we have a lot of similarity, but as well as differences when you compare Brazil and the United States. So I want to get directly into this video for today. Today's video, I'm calling it Conservative Social Influencer Says the End of Slavery Was a Big Mistake and that Abolition Violated Property Rights. Before I get into this video and just break down why this is such a controversial statement, make sure you like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel, and click on the notification bell so you know every time I put up a new video. With that said, let's get directly into this video for today. Okay, so this is the guy who made the comment. These are two images from, I've said over and over that Brazil seems to have a fascination with basing its novellas in the slavery era. There's too many to name. These are two more novellas that aired on, I think, global television. If it's not global, it might have been, there's been a couple shown on the Record TV channel, two of Brazil's biggest television networks. So why is this a big deal, what this guy said? When you think about Brazil's history of slavery that lasted about 350 years, starting, I don't know, about 1538 is generally when people agree, between 1538 and 1545, you could say. I've repeatedly told you that Brazil imported anywhere from 10 to 12 to 15 times more enslaved Africans in the United States. We're talking about 5 million Africans were shipped to Brazil versus less than 400,000 in the United States. Historians have talked about the brutality of Brazil's slavery, saying that in some eras, slaves were only going to live for 7 years after they were enslaved because of the brutal nature of the slavery regime. Slavery lasted in Brazil until 1888, a full quarter of a century after it was ended in the United States. The other thing I want to point out here is this: in Brazil, you have definitely a polarization of society. You see a polarization between black and white. You see a polarization between left and right. So the guy who made these controversial statements is what they call a Bolsonarista, a person who supported the presidency of former President Jair Bolsonaro, who was president in Brazil from, I think, 2019 to 2023, when he was replaced by President Lula, who took office for his third term. But that vote was almost split evenly down the middle. It just showed how Brazil is completely divided between what you can say liberal and conservative. When Jair Bolsonaro came on the scene, he was labeled by online articles in the news, the press, as the Brazilian Trump. Take that for how you want to figure it. I mean, if they're comparing him to somebody like Trump, you should understand what that means. The comparisons are good in some ways and not in other ways. I have a different view of that I'm not going to talk about today. The other thing is that abolition or not, modern day Brazil still looks at its black population as if it were second-class citizens they still don't separate Black people from the slave history. Every day, you online or just in videos, everyday life, you hear jokes, comments, people's ideas about slavery, like Black people should still be enslaved. We should have never ended slavery. People feel at liberty to be able to make, just really crude comments towards Black women in terms of, hey, if this was slavery, I'd be able to do whatever I wanted to do with you. Okay. So it's in this context why I want to explain why what this guy said was so inflammatory. It was just wow. Like it's another example of how people see the slavery era. A couple of months ago, I had done a video about a bartender. I think it might have been in Minas Gerais, the state of Minas Gerais. He made a comment where they should have never ended slavery here because a Black man had asked him simply for a clean glass to drink out of. They should have never ended slavery was his view. I did a video about that a couple months ago. I think he was immediately fired, but I'm just saying that's the point of how people continue to see the slave era and the modern day Black population. That's why I wanted to talk about this today. So let's get into what is it that he said and how did people react to it? Because people came for him immediately. Like one of my contacts down in Bahia, he was just like, Mark, they're canceling this guy. I don't know who he is. I never had heard of him until this controversy blew up, but apparently he's a pretty big social influencer. He's a supporter of the Jair Bolsonaro administration. Like I said, the country is still divided between left and right. It's pretty clear when you see the debates going on online. So the article is actually called Bolsonaro Influencer Says the End of Slavery Was a Big Mistake and that the Golden Law violated property rights. The Golden Law being signed by Princess Isabel in 1888 on May 13th. And it abolished it freed the rest of the slaves that still had not gained their freedom in Brazil. Okay. He says that slavery would have ended before World War II without revoking anyone's property, said Renato Amoedo. Amoedo, I don't know how you pronounce his name. But he's talking about revoking anyone's property. He's talking about Black Brazilians, obviously, because they were considered property under Brazil's slave regime. So let's get into this story. Influencer Renato Amoedo, better known on social media as Renato Trezotão, has sparked controversy by arguing that the end of slavery in Brazil was a mistake made by the monarchy against the entrepreneurs of the time. This is an image that was depicted, I think, a French painter on his travels to Brazil. He painted a number of images of what he saw during Brazil's slave era. This is one of the most famous paintings that he did. During his appearance on the Taís Araújo's podcast on November 27th, the influencer said that one of the big reasons the empire ended was the revocation of property, referring to Black people as property. The podcast generated great repercussions and was widely criticized for his statements on slavery and abolition in Brazil. This is Princess Isabel, who signed what's called the Lei Áurea, which means the Golden Law, May 13th, 1888, abolishing slavery. Trezotão, who presents himself as an anarcho-capitalist and part of the Red Pill community. Ideologies that advocate the extinction of the state and the exclusive regulation of the market, as well as preaching masculinism as opposed to feminism, has been a controversial figure on social media. Author of the book Bitcoin Red Pill, he also associates the usage of cryptocurrencies with the idea of men's liberation. Again, these are some more images taken from Brazil's particular slave era that lasted from about 1588 to 1888, about 358 years. In an excerpt that went viral, Trezotão stated that slavery would have been ended before the Second World War without revoking anyone's property. He questioned the monarchy's decision to abolish slavery, suggesting that the end of the property of the enslaved harmed slave owners. So rather than looking at the brutality of slavery and the idea that a human owns another human, he's looking at the loss for the slave owners. Like, what about the slave owners he's looking like? Like, really? We know that slavery has been a part of history for millennium, okay? But who is it that's advocating and arguing for the rights of the slave owners when you have labeled human beings as property? Continuing, He also provoked the podcast presenters, asking, "Have you ever seen anyone say that the Golden Law might have been a big mistake for Brazil?" During the provocation, the other participants remained silent, clearly embarrassed, but did not rebut Três Oitão's statements. It's like, he's a guest on the show. They didn't even really want to push back. When you look at the videos, like some of these people, they were clearly like taken aback, like, oh boy, how are we going to deal with this? They didn't want to get into a big debate with a guest on their show, but at the same time, they knew that he had moved into some really controversial territory. Another picture from the slave era in Brazil is a slave master with 5 of his slaves. I did a video some time ago talking about the meaning of Brazilian slaves not having shoes. You'll see they don't have shoes on. The slave master being the only one who has on shoes in this picture. YouTuber Wilker Leão, a member of the Free Brazil movement, also took part in the conversation. And instead of rebutting Três Oitão's arguments, he limited himself to saying that the topic was a complex issue. Another picture saying trabalho escravo, meaning slave work. Três Oitão followed his reasoning and questioned. The end of slavery was going to be gradual, but the princess arrived and said, "All your property is now worthless." The influencer also questioned if the slave owner was happy with the monarchy, insinuating that the Brazilian monarchy shouldn't have revoked slavery without worrying about the interest of the slave owners. Doesn't the monarchy exist to maintain a natural relationship to guarantee their rights? Finally, the influencer provoked again. How could the queen revoke property without compensation? I think that's supposed to be princess, because it was Princess Isabel who signed the document called the Lei Áurea that freed the remaining slaves that existed in Brazil. So needless to say, the guy's comments, people came at him with the quickness, and people wanted to cancel him instantly. So as I always do, here are some of the comments that you can find in the Portuguese from the original Instagram channel. The Instagram page that I took some of these comments from, the Instituto Luiz Gama. Luiz Gama, it's intriguing because we're talking about slavery. Luiz Gama was a famous Black abolitionist who managed to free, I think, about 500 slaves, even though they didn't permit him to have to be officially recognized as a lawyer, because they barred Blacks from studying in law schools there. Okay. So this is from the institute that takes his name. The original comments in Portuguese here. I will read these and translate it in English. First comment from the Instituto Luiz Gama page says, Bolsonaro influencer Renato Amoedo, known on the internet as Renato Três Oitão, argued that the end of slavery in Brazil was a mistake made by the monarchy against the slave owners of the time. During a live broadcast on the Taís Araújo podcast on November 27, 24, he said that one of the big reasons the empire ended was the revocation of property, referring to Black people as things or objects, and lamenting the end of the monarchy. I want to point out that I just became aware, and this really became a point online, even though the podcast happened on November 27th of 24, I didn't start noticing people really making a big issue out of this until about a month later, like around a little bit after Christmas. So here come the comments. The first comment, there's a few famous people who made comments on here, one in particular that I'm going to get to. This is from Fala Mumu. This is my friend Rodrigo, who I did a video about him a couple of weeks ago. He was the guy who was talking about how he wanted his children to come out Black like him, and the only way he could do that is with a Black woman. So he's chiming in on this. He says defending Nazism is a crime. Defending slavery should be a non-bailable offense. So even though I didn't include it in this article, I think he did make a representation. He made a comment about the Nazi regime as well. It seems that he's probably in support of the Nazi regime. Whole other history that obviously I'm not going to get into today. Next comment says, but people, the barriers to civility have been successfully broken down. You can say whatever you want in public and there will be no consequences. It seems that the bottom of the barrel is still far away. They say Ave Maria in Brazil. It's just like it's a way of just expressing disbelief that something is being done or said. The next comment is from Netinho de Paula. Just for those of you who don't know, Netinho de Paula, very famous guy. He started off as a samba singer in a pagode group, which is a style of music that falls under the pagode genre. Guy's been a politician. He's a big entrepreneur. He was a former councilman for the city of Sao Paulo. And also, I remember him being the first Black person in Brazil to try to start a Black television network. So, Netinho de Paula, everybody knows who this guy is. He took a lot of time to express how he felt about this guy's comment. So, this is Netinho de Paula speaking, what he wrote in his response under the Instagram page that I'm talking about today. He says, truly, this gentleman ignores that human rights overlap with economic rights. We need to think about the golden law and the question of property within a contextual analysis and understand what the inalienable right is. Brazil has taken a crucial step towards building a more just and egalitarian society. The recognition that property cannot be exercised over human beings is fundamental to understanding the evolution of social and civil rights in Brazil. Furthermore, it is important to consider that the abolition of slavery was not just a legal change, but a social transformation that required adaptations in various spheres of Brazilian life. The transition to a society without slavery brought significant challenges, but also opportunities for the consolidation of new values and social practices. The country began to face the need for social inclusion, education, and the creation of public policies to serve the newly freed population. Finally, the discussion about the Golden Law and its relationship with property rights should be seen not only from the perspective of legislation, but also part of a larger movement towards humanity and dignity. The critique of abolition, which still persists in some contemporary discourses, must be challenged and contextualized. The fight for freedom is a demand that transcends the economic question, pointing to the urgency of recognizing and respecting the human condition in all of its dimensions. In short, the Golden Law should be celebrated as a triumph of ethics over economics and a fundamental step towards building a fairer society. The view that abolition violated property rights not only ignores the historical context, but also disregards the social advances that freedom and human dignity represent. By abolishing slavery, Brazil not only aligns itself with progressive trends in the world, but also reaffirms its commitment to the values that underpin a civilized and democratic society. I suggest that he delves deeper into these laws to make sure that his reasoning or training was wrong. In 1837, the first education law in Brazil was that Blacks cannot go to school. It was law number 1 of January 14th, 1837. They are forbidden to attend public schools. 1850, the law of the land, Blacks were not allowed to own land. It was law 601 of September 18th, 1850. The law on vagrants and people who practice capoeira. The Penal Code Decree number 847 of October 11th, 1890, just 2 years after abolition, mind you. Those who wandered the streets without work or proven residence would go to jail, as well as those who were playing or carrying objects related to capoeira. That's really, all of these are important, but you have to understand, at the end of slavery, Brazil started in even like maybe less than 20 years before the slow abolition of slavery, Brazil opened its gates, opened its borders for European immigrants to come into the country. They wanted to replace the Black labor with European immigrants. They wanted to whiten the country. So they opened the border to countries like Portugal, Spain, Italy, Germany, Poland. All of these different immigrants were coming into Brazil. And so then with these people taking the jobs, recent Black slaves who were left to their own accord, they were kind of frozen out of the job market. So Brazil has always argued we never had racist laws like the United States. Like, just because you don't put the word Black on it, and in some cases, these are actually laws that actually mention Blacks. But the law of vagrants and people who practice capoeira, those are Black people too, because most of the vagrants in the streets without a job are going to be Black, and those practicing capoeira, most of them are going to be Black. So without mentioning prohibiting Black people in certain genres of the country, certain practices of the country, they still were able to exclude and put laws on the books that were kind of like work like Black codes in Brazil. In 1968, the Ox Law, law number 5465 of July 3rd, 1968, was the first quota law. And that's a big deal because there's been a huge debate over the quota system for affirmative action to get Black, brown, and indigenous people in the Brazilian universities, because the Brazilian university campuses are usually like purely white or people who are considered off-white. So the quota law that went into effect at the end of the 90s and the early 2000s have opened up more opportunities for Black, brown, and indigenous people to be able to go to the university. So for those who argue against quotas for the university, here you have a law of a quota, and it wasn't for Blacks. It was for the children of landowners who got places in technical schools and universities. Go back and read about the 1850 law. Okay, which says blacks were not allowed to own land. So there's been laws on Brazil's books to hinder the progress of the black population. So people always look at that and be like, how are you against quotas? You weren't against quotas when they opened up the door and subsidized up between 4 and 5 million European immigrants to come into the country, gave them land, set them up to be successful in the country while they left blacks to their own accord. Moving on, the next comment. So this is all what Nichinho de Paula had to say about this. Pretty well thought out comment by Nichinho. It just shows he's not just a businessman. He's not just an entertainer. He had a lot of thoughts on this particular topic. Next comment says, he should have had to leave the studio in handcuffs, talking about the Bolsonaro conservative who made the comment. Next comment says, I don't usually speak out, but I think it's important for everyone to know that the law of the free womb and the law of the sexagenarians, although important laws for the abolitionist movement, they were laws with little practical effectiveness because, as everyone knows, a child of a slave at that time could be free, but the mother was still enslaved. Therefore, in practice, this child remained in the same unhealthy conditions as his or her mother. It is also easy to see that it was very rare for a slave to even reach the age of 60 alive or in good health, again, because of what I spoke about earlier, the brutality of Brazilian slavery. You work a slave to death. In Brazil, from what I've read, because Brazil was closer to Africa than the United States, Brazilian slave owners felt like we can just work a slave to death and then import more from Africa. Whereas in the United States, as the distance was longer and thus more expensive, they tended to keep their slaves in better condition than those in Brazil. Therefore, becoming free after the age of 60 was an illusion for the vast majority of enslaved people. So you're creating a law freeing people of the age of 60 or over from slavery. But by that time, some people may not have made it to age 60, or they might be in just terrible health by that time. Next comment says, these guys at the table exchanging ideas, what a situation. Next comment is, not ignorance, is really bad catharism. Spartacus is another popular social media influencer. He's been pretty well known throughout the country for years. He has 344,000 followers on Instagram. A lot of people would be familiar with Spartacus. Okay. But so what did he have to say? It's worrying, it's problemsome to live in a time where comments like this are allowed. The last comment I'm gonna say is, my God, what kind of bottom of the barrel is this? And this is from Teresa Cristina. This is from her official page. And as I said, there's a lot of famous people chiming in on this particular topic. This is Teresa Cristina. She's a well-known samba and Brazilian popular music singer. I think most people know who Teresa Cristina is. So not only was it just, everyday people chiming in on this particular topic, but famous Brazilians took issue with it as well. So before I move on and in this video, I want to put more of this into context as to why this is such a controversial statement that he could make. First of all, I had to come to understand why so many people supported Jair Bolsonaro. A lot of it has to do with religion, and a lot of it has to do with people feeling that Brazil was going too far to the left. So these are just articles that talk about Jair Bolsonaro. Plenty of information about this guy online. People see him as a far-right extremist. They see him as a dictator. They see him as a racist. Everything else. I mean, there was a movement when he was running for president. People were just like, anybody but him. Okay. Not going to spend a lot of time talking about him, but other articles, I've done quite a bit on Bolsonaro. For presidential candidate Jair Bolsonaro, the Brazilian Trump, Africans are responsible for slavery, and the country owes the black population nothing for slavery. This is what Jair Bolsonaro believes. Another person is looking at, because this is a hotly debated topic, and this particular article says, why is it wrong to say that blacks enslaved blacks? Again, all of these articles, definitely go over to blackbraziltoday.com. Obviously, I wouldn't have time to go through every single article, but these are some of the articles that I've posted over the years. This is from 2019. President Bolsonaro is the racist chief of the Brazilian KKK. All right. So, people argue, of course, there's never been an official KKK in Brazil, but what he's talking about is the ideology behind how people think in terms of their views on the black population. And they see Jair Bolsonaro as the commander-in-chief of the Brazilian KKK. There was a comment by, people remember who David Duke is, former Grand Wizard of the KKK. Upon hearing about Jair Bolsonaro and some of the things that he was saying, he was like, man, he sounds like us. What does that say? Now you have a lot of black supporters of Jair Bolsonaro talking about one of his a dark-skinned congressman. This black congressman actually adopted Bolsonaro's last name to show how much that he had supported him. So this article on dark-skinned congressman, President Bolsonaro says he came out a little burnt because he stayed in the belly too long. Otherwise, he looked like him. Bolsonaro saying, if he had stayed in his mother's womb a little bit longer, he'd have come out looking like his congressman. He made a joke like this live on his presentation. And this guy is a firm supporter of Jair Bolsonaro. That's a whole nother story. Definitely have to do a story about black conservatives in Brazil. Okay. Then we have, I found this slave in the smoking area. Whoever the owner is, let me know. Student at the Fundação Getúlio Vargas College suspended for a racist comment photo of a black student. I talked about this a while ago. This guy right here I forgot how much he was fined. He might have to do some prison time for making a joke about this guy right here who was sitting on the campus. This is the guy who made the comment. I post this because this is how people continue to see black people in Brazil. The Black Brazil Today blog is full of these type of articles showing how Brazilians continue to look at black people as slaves. This right here says, Bolsonaro made a comment to one of his supporters who was in the video, say, "Are you breeding cockroaches in that hair?" President Bolsonaro accused of racism after making a comment about a black supporter, asking him a question like, okay, the dude has a pretty big afro. He says, "Man, are you breeding cockroaches in your hair?" Okay, this is his supporter right here doing a live chat. This is the supporter with Bolsonaro here. So I'm saying, I actually understand how there are some people who support conservatives. You can't always agree with everything on the left. You can't agree with everything on the right. For me, it's a little bit of a mixture of the two. But the problems for black people, particularly, are with conservatism often comes racist sentiments on the part of people who consider themselves conservatives. I'm not saying all. I'm just saying it's something that we can see, which makes us hesitant to become more conservative. Jair Bolsonaro, during his presidency, he was responsible for 25% of the racist statements made by Brazilian officials. What a lot of people believe about Brazil is that Brazil has always been racist, but people would tend to hide their racist sentiments. But during the presidency of Jair Bolsonaro, people felt a free, open, liberty to be able to make racist statements whenever they wanted to, because they had a guy who a lot of people saw as racist as, basically the commander in chief. What else do we have here? All of these have to do with how Brazil still deals with slavery. I've talked a lot about in the modern era now, every year they find people in Brazil working in conditions that are analogous to slavery. This woman was freed by authorities after working basically as a slave for 38 years. There's numerous articles I've covered. It's impossible to cover them all because every year, like hundreds, if not thousands of Brazilians are being freed from conditions that are similar to slavery. You got pictures that people will protest, like that picture looks a little bit too close to the slave era. This is a motel that attracted, people to come to the motel with slavery themes. The motel is called Senzala, which means slave quarters. Black people being embarrassed going through school when slavery comes up, because in Brazilian history books, that's generally how Black people are presented. This is a descendant of a plantation owner who dressed up her Black female workers as like slaves to greet and serve tourists. She turned her former plantation into a tourist spot. So again, how Brazil deals with slavery. Comments on social network pages show that Brazil still has a certain nostalgic feeling about slavery, says researcher. Again, these are more articles just talking a little bit about slavery in a modern day situation in Brazil. Okay, and this is Nichinho again. This is Teresa Cristina. And this is, again, Spartacus. These are people who commented on this particular topic. So, a lot of people say this dude is being canceled, and I'm seeing this all over the internet. Some people we have to have free speech, but some people say it's like up to a certain extent, a guy shouldn't be able to say something like this. So anyway, that's why I wanted to put this story up today. What did you think about this? Instead of looking at the idea of humans being considered property of somebody, he's looking at it like this was unfair to the slave owners. They weren't compensated. What about them? It was a big mistake to just allow slavery to end that way. He's saying that the slavery era would have ended slowly by World War II. So he's basically saying slavery would have went on another 50 some years. gradual with the gradual abolition of slavery. Like, anyway, what did you all think about today's video? Drop a comment in the comment section. Let's have a conversation about this. Like this video, share this video, consider subscribing to the channel. Click on the notification bell so that you'll get the notification when I put up another video. With that said, I'm going to end this video here. Request that you all come back. Check out the next video that I post here at Black Brazil Today.